This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Wednesday, and that means it's time for another Deck History, the series where I trace the development of prominent deck archetypes from their beginnings to the present day. So normally for this series, there's a poll that decides the topic, but this week's poll ended up in a complete 50-50 deadlock. The annoying thing is the poll probably did not have exactly half the people voting for Splinter Twin and the other half voting for Belcher, but YouTube just rounds things up and shows no decimal points or total votes or anything, so I have no idea what actually won. I even got in contact with creator support to try to get the actual answer about which deck won this poll, but they told me that there was no way to know. I left feedback that they should probably fix that, so hopefully that's something that changes in the future. So the point here is, I decided to cast the tie-breaking vote and I went with Splinter Twin. It's lost a whole lot of polls since I began this series earlier this year, so I figure it deserved to finally get an episode. As is the case for many decks, Splinter Twin gets its name from a specific card that was printed in 2010's Rise of the Eldrazi. This card can be combined with creatures who untap a creature or permanent when they enter the battlefield to create an infinite combo, since you can copy the creature and use its enter the battlefield ability to untap the original copy and rinse and repeat until you can swing for lethal. Splinter Twin decks tend to be control decks, with the combo featured as the main win condition. At one time or another, Splinter Twin decks have found success in Standard, Modern, and Legacy, and in this video we'll talk about each of those decks and how and why they've changed over time. Splinter Twin decks first showed up in Standard in 2011, and Blue-Red Splinter Twin was the most common variant in those days. The deck's main combo was all about Deceiver Exarch and Splinter Twin. The printing of the Deceiver Exarch in Rise of the Eldrazi is what made Splinter Twin a relevant card after it hadn't done anything in any format. The Exarch had Flash, which made the combo far more potent than it might have otherwise been. You could flash the Exarch in at the end of your opponent's turn 3 and tap something down, like a land, so your opponent would have a harder time interacting on your turn. Then you could simply untap and slap Splinter Twin on the Exarch and combo off on turn 4. However, unlike some combo decks which are really all in on their combo, the first Splinter Twin deck set the precedent of being able to play a more typical control game before winning with something like Inferno Titan or Sphinx of Dwar Isle. The deck ran typical control elements including counter magic and powerful planeswalkers like Jace the Mind Sculptor. This approach meant that the deck had a pretty good game against very different kinds of decks. An aggro deck would have a hard time beating you because they were unlikely to be able to interact with your combo, so they had to kill the twin player before turn 4, which wasn't easy. A control deck would have more of a chance of interfering with the combo, and in those situations the deck itself could go a more controlling route. This is something that would be true about most twin decks going forward. Matt Nass became the first player to top 8 a premier event with Splinter Twin in any format, and he achieved this at Grand Prix Pittsburgh in 2011. By this point in 2011, Jace the Mind Sculptor had been banned, and this played a role in the deck becoming significantly different. In addition to the Exarch Twin combo, the deck's other win condition was Grim Lavamancer. The deck was loaded up with lots of cheap spells, and the graveyard provided some serious fuel for the Lavamancer. Matt Nass's deck was very consistent, and it had lots of ways of finding the combo. One of the more interesting inclusions was Shrine of Piercing Vision. The deck ran a bunch of cheap blue spells that themselves helped you sift through your deck, and the Shrine gave the deck a way to look at big chunks of cards so that it could help you find either the Twin or the Exarch. This deck had access to lots of very cheap card draw spells, including Gitaxian Probe, Ponder, Preordain, and Twisted Image. The Probe came with the added value of also allowing you to check to see if the coast was clear for you to combo off. These cards, combined with the Shrine, really meant it wasn't that hard for the deck to find its combo pieces. Some other key cards for the deck were Dispel and Spell Pierce, which were pretty good at protecting your combo. However, this marked the end of Splinter Twin's brief success in Standard, as Splinter Twin rotated out of Standard by the end of 2011. However, there was another format where the Exarch and Splinter Twin were still legal together, and that format was Modern, which at the time was a very new format, having been created earlier in 2011. Just like today, the format featured cards from 8th edition forward, which meant there was a much larger card pool. Splinter Twin decks showed up in Modern for the first time at the end of 2011, when 2 decks top-8'd Pro Tour Philadelphia, including one that took down the event in the hands of Samuel Estrati, and while the deck's core game plan was pretty much the same, many of the cards were different. One broad difference in Samuel's deck was that it was a little more all-in on the combo, not really running alternate win conditions like we saw in Standard. This is partly because in Modern, there was additional redundancy for the combo, in particular Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker and Pestermite. For the purposes of comboing off, Kiki Jiki could do the same thing as Splinter Twin, and Pestermite could do the same thing as Deceiver Exarch, even down to the Flash. The deck also had the usual control elements, including several cheap card draw spells and counter magic, as well as a board sweeper in Fire Spout, which enabled the deck to survive some early aggressive starts. Some of the counter magic legal in Modern was especially attractive for twin decks, in particular Pact of Negation and Disrupting Shoal. The Pact and the Shoal were free counterspells, and you didn't really need to worry about the downsides of either, because you would use them to protect the combo and win before you made it to your next turn, and before going down a card would matter. Spellskite was another card that could provide some serious protection for the combo since it could redirect removal spells to itself. Notably, there was another deck at Pro Tour Philadelphia that top-aided with Splinter Twin, but it did it from the sideboard. Andreas Prost's Pyromancer Ascension deck ran 4 Exarchs and 4 Splinter Twins in the sideboard, which meant the deck could abandon its usual game plan and just become a twin deck in matchups where that made more sense. This would be something that the other Pyromancer Ascension and Storm decks would do in Modern, as long as Splinter Twin was legal in the format. By the end of 2011, there were 2 cards that got banned in an attempt to weaken blue decks, including Splinter Twin, Ponder, and Preordain. These 2 cards allowed players to see way too many cards, which was making blue decks, including Twin, too consistent. This meant that future versions of Splinter Twin in Modern had to rely on some less effective draw spells, but Splinter Twin managed to still find plenty of success. In addition to a shift in draw spells, some other things changed too. In 2012, the deck stopped always being a blue-red one. At Grand Prix Turin that year, Alessandro Lippi piloted a Grixis version of the deck. He added black to gain access to discard spells, in particular Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize. Playing these spells was great for Twin because it gave the deck a way to make sure the coast was clear before comboing off, as you could get rid of any card that might interfere with you making all of your tokens. While not all Twin decks went this route, Grixis Twin decks did start to show up some in Modern from this point on. 2013 would also see Splinter Twin decks undergo significant changes. Perhaps the biggest change was that the deck started to be a little less all-in on the combo. So far, the decks we've looked at in Modern didn't really run other win conditions in the main deck, but in 2013, Patrick Dickman finished in first place at Grand Prix Antwerp, running the combo of course, but also Grim Lavamancer and Vendilion Click. The Lavamancer was something we saw in Standard, but this is the first time the Click has come up in this video. It served multiple purposes, including disrupting the opponent and making sure the coast was clear for the combo, but Twin decks also kind of regularly won the game with the 3-1 flyer. Sure, the Twin combo was more common, but the Click, Grim Lavamancer, and Snapcaster Mage sometimes did the job too. By diversifying a bit, the deck became much more resilient since shutting down the combo with a hate card no longer shut down the deck entirely. From here on, Vendilion Click became a staple in Splinter Twin decks. 2014 would be another year where Splinter Twin decks changed significantly, with multiple variants putting up impressive finishes. At Pro Tour Born of the Gods that year, 3 Twin decks finished in the top 8, and they were all very different. One of the decks that top-aided the event was a so-called Patriot Twin deck that got its name because it ran red, white, and blue. Adding white gave the deck access to Restoration Angel, yet another flash creature and one that could blink creatures. Now, this did not combo off with Splinter Twin because exiling the original copy of the card would mean Splinter Twin fell off, but it did combo with Kiki Jiki, who the angel could blink over and over as you populated the board with more angels. The angel could also combo with other enter the battlefield creatures like Snapcaster Mage for some serious value. Obviously, the angel also represented a very real threat in the air that could win the game on its own if it had to. There was also a more traditional blue-red twin deck that top-aided the event, running the usual combo pieces as well as Vendilion Click and Snapcaster Mage. Of the 3 twin decks to top 8 at Pro Tour Born of the Gods, the one with the highest finish was Patrick Dickman's Teamer version of the deck, which came in 3rd. And yes, this is the same Patrick Dickman who top-aided with a twin deck at Grand Prix Antwerp in 2013. Of the twin decks we've looked at, this is the one that is the most aggressive. Adding green gave the deck access to 2 powerful 2-drops, Scavenging Ooze and Tarmogoyf. These 2 could get big in a hurry and threaten the opponent in the early game, giving the deck an entirely different access to operate on. These three very different Splinter Twin decks represented a trend where pretty much all mid-range and control decks with blue and red in them began including the combo. Teamer, Patriot, and blue-red twin decks continue to find success throughout 2014 and 2015. Between Pro Tour Born of the Gods, which was in February, through the end of 2015, Splinter Twin decks put up 18 Grand Prix top 8s and 4 Pro Tour top 8s in Modern. And remember, there aren't nearly as many Modern events as there are for Standard. So those are some pretty impressive numbers. In 2015, some blue-red twin decks started running Blood Moon in the main deck. The Moon really hated on a lot of decks in the format, and crippling the mana of other decks also meant it would be a lot easier for you to keep them from interfering with your game plan. At this point, Splinter Twin decks made up an absolutely massive percentage of the competitive field, and it was by far the most successful deck in the format. However, it's worth noting, most players didn't really feel like the deck was unfair or broken. It didn't violate Modern's turn 3 rule, which was generally that a deck couldn't be able to win the game early consistently or it was too powerful. Twin decks could generally only win on turn 4, so it came as a pretty big surprise to many that in January of 2016, Splinter Twin got banned out of the format. The big reason the ban happened, according to Wizards of the Coast, was that it was becoming increasingly clear that there wasn't really a reason not to run Splinter Twin combo, and more people were just jamming it into their decks. Or as Wizards of the Coast put it in their January 2016 announcement, decks that are this strong can hurt diversity by pushing the decks that it defeats out of competition. They can also reduce diversity by supplanting similar decks. The announcement also gave some specific examples of where this had happened, with Twinless Teamer and Jeskai decks having disappeared completely from the metagame. Another problem was that because of the presence of Kiki-Jiki and Pestermite, there were multiple ways to pull off the combo, and it was just too consistent. This is an interesting ban because it had more to do with competitive diversity than it did with the deck being unfair. So yeah, Splinter Twin got the axe in Modern, and it has never been unbanned. It is one of the more polarizing bans around, something I think has played a role in the poll for this video ending up how it did. About half the community was happy that Twin got banned, and the other half was pretty shocked by the development. While Splinter Twin itself did get banned out of the format, there are a few decks that are the spiritual successor to Splinter Twin, in particular Twinless Exarch, a deck that's been around in Modern since 2015. As you probably guessed, Twinless Exarch is pretty much the same deck, just without the twin. Kiki-Jiki, Deceiver Exarch, and Pestermite were still around, so the combo was still viable, just far less consistent without Splinter Twin. So, that marks the end of Splinter Twin decks in Modern. Between 2011 and 2015, Splinter Twin was one of the defining decks of the format, but from the perspective of Wizards of the Coast and many players, it was causing problems in the format when it came to metagame diversity, and that led to it getting banned. There is still one more format where Splinter Twin has made an impact, and that's Legacy. Now, Splinter Twin has never been the force in Legacy that it was in Modern, so we don't have nearly as much to cover here, but the deck has found some success in the format. For example, Max Ansbro top-8'd the 2015 Legacy Championship with a Splinter Twin deck. Obviously, in Legacy, the deck still had access to Splinter Twin because it hadn't been banned there, and in a lot of ways the deck looked a lot like it did in Modern, running all the same creatures we've already seen. However, Legacy does have access to more cards, and perhaps the most notably, this deck gets to run Force of Will. Twin decks love free counterspells for protecting their combo, and this is the king of all free counterspells. The deck also had access to more powerful ways to rip through the deck, including Brainstorm and Dig Through Time, which made things significantly more consistent. However, this is really Twin's only top 8 at a major Legacy event, though the deck still does see a bit of play in the format from time to time. So, that's the history of Splinter Twin decks. As we've seen, decks featuring the Twin combo have found a bit of success in both Standard and Legacy, and are arguably one of the most important decks in the history of the Modern format. If you want to have a say in what I do in next week's video, don't forget to vote in the poll on the Community tab. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future episodes of this series and a whole bunch of other content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on the over 20 earlier episodes of this series, you will see a playlist on your screen shortly. And lastly, if you like my content and want to give back to the channel, you can do that on Patreon. Thanks for watching.